Okay, official good morning to everybody. Working with Shamatha practice today. Um, this is something I'm not sure if we've done this one exclusively or not, although it's a favorite of mine. It's working with the flavors of expansion and contraction. So some of you who might have worked with me for some time are familiar with this one, but I thought that it would be good to go for a review. Let's just get into it, shall we? Okay, so here we have just simply flavors of expansion, contraction. So how we're going to be doing it today is working with the body. In terms of the themes of the calming, cooling, flavors of shamatha, this expansion, contraction focus can be adapted to lots of different practices, but the way that we're going to be doing it today is focusing exclusively on the body. So simply put, the themes of expansion and contraction. So we're looking at our somatic experience, and any sensation can expand or contract. What does that mean? Things that are expansive. They can grow larger, wider, move outward, become diffuse. Yeah, sometimes a sensation is contracted and then it gets bigger, and it's like, oh no, it's getting bigger, but then it tends to kind of like as though the particles begin to separate and it becomes a little bit more diffuse. So that's a way in which expansion can manifest itself. So it doesn't have to, it can still stay rather solid and move into new territory or grow a little bit larger. Or in this way become diffuse. It's a way in which it can kind of disappear, or how shall we say, the sensation can move towards dissolution through its own diffuseness. One of the salient qualities of expansion is more often than not, people tend to report that expansion-based focuses are somewhat pleasant in nature. Now then, to contrast that, some sensations are contractive in nature, contraction. So that means shrinking, getting smaller, pulling inward, collapsing, congealing. So collapsing can be kind of the contractive counterbalance of something becoming diffuse. So in expansion, something can become diffuse and then disappear. Contraction, sometimes something can collapse in and of itself and then kind of disappear that way. Or it could just collapse and kind of become more denser, congeal. Yeah. So themes of just expansion, any way in which something is becoming larger, or contraction, any way in which something is kind of getting smaller, or more so, being able to just simply detect underlying forces. Something might be rather still. I think this is something that's important. Is it can be both. So we should be able to discern the flavors of both expansion and contraction. Even within the breath, if we just kind of sit with the breath for a minute, as the chest expands, the diaphragm contracts. Yeah, and as we exhale and the chest contracts, the diaphragm expands. So that's right there is something that is very tangible. We can all connect with right now, where there's simultaneous expansion, contraction. Oftentimes, when we have the experience of a sensation being solid, one of the ways that we can potentially create the conditions for it to move in towards a flow state would be, can we take that solid sensation within our awareness and be able to discern, is there any part of that, there's an underlying force that wants to pull in? Within that, is there an underlying force that wants to pull out? And oftentimes the experience of solidity of a sensation is because the expansive contractive forces are not able to flow through each other, but they get caught. So that's a way that I like to work with back pain or headaches and such like that, is just being able to sit there with the solid sensation and just allow whatever wants to expand, allow whatever wants to contract. And somehow within that ability to discern the flavors and permit, allow, bring equanimity towards it, they tend to interdigitate and be able to flow through. So both focus is highly effective. Sometimes when we have the pain, sometimes I use the metaphor of, is it a balloon or a star? Yeah. So a balloon might be, if we really get into the sensation, well, it has this contractive shell, but inside wants to expand. Yeah. Like the air within a balloon wants to expand and become diffuse, but the rubber plastic shell of the balloon is keeping it trapped. So it creates this solid form that way. Sometimes a discomfort or a sensation, a solid sensation in the body manifests that way. Conversely, sometimes it can be like a star, where the star is like this solid contractive core, but it has this radiating corona of energy around it that wants to expand outward. So sometimes the discomfort in the body can have those qualities, where the contraction is more on the outside, the expansion is the contraction is more on the inside, the expansion is more on the outside. But that might be a little bit more adept and down the line. So for now, let's just begin to cultivate the discernment, the ability to discern just expansion, anytime we're aware of expansion in the body, contraction, any way, shape, or form, we're aware of the forces of contraction in the body. And from time to time, if we can discern both. So really what we're doing is we're looking at impermanence as it takes place in the three-dimensional space. Oftentimes I use this bell curve, sine wave graph, something coming into being, passing away from being. That just shows kind of linear time. Really, if we're looking at expansion in the body, this is kind of how it happens. Kind of has this biomorphic amoebic flux until something dissolves. One of the things that I like is that expansion contraction, when we can really get into it, it can be very, very focus inducing. It can really sharpen, hone concentration. And it's extremely equanimity inducing as well. The more that we can get into the expansion contraction flow, the equanimity really tends to build. And it tends to really take out the emotional tinge of things. So sometimes if I'm feeling an emotive overwhelm, if I can cue into the expansive contractive forces of the emotion in the body, that tends to down-regulate it quite significantly. Whether it's the increase of the equanimity or something about that expansion contraction focus really tends to take the sharpness of the emotions out. So as I'm doing the exercise, I'm just kind of free floating within the body, just allowing my awareness to just go wherever it goes. Notice whatever sensation makes itself available, contacting it, and then label. Is it expansion, contraction, or both? Might sound like this. Contraction. Contraction. Expansion. Expansion. Both. And so on like that. Just notice what you notice and make a call. Is it expansion, contraction, or both? As always, a solid D- is what we're looking for. Just allow yourself to just explore, have fun with it. And it's okay to guess. It's okay to not be correct. The main thing is that you are continually redirecting your attention towards a particular flavor set. So that's pretty much it. That's pretty much kind of the theme of the day. Before we go into it, does anybody have any questions about any of that?
I have a question about the focus.
Uh-huh.
If I'm honing in on an emotion, it tends to make things worse. I think you're saying the opposite.
So
when you're focusing on a certain emotion, it tends to dissipate.
So now then, I'd be curious about focusing on the emotion, how you mean that. Because sometimes focusing on their emotion, sometimes people get into the sensation as well as the story, and then the story tends to perpetuate and fuel the sensation within the body. And that's a way in which we're fueling an emotion. What I'm spotlighting here today is if you can get into the somatic, the bodily sensation of the emotion, and to the exclusion of everything else, merely focus on the expansive contractive movement, then it might tend to take the intensity out of the emotion, for sure. Now then, that is to say, sometimes we have an emotion and then we contact it and it's like, oh, it's expanding. Oh no, it's getting worse because it's getting bigger. And that can be very much an initial experience. But then it's like, if we continue to permit, allow, eventually it'll occupy more space, but become more diffuse. And thus the equanimity comes in, and the sting of the emotion tends to drop. So that's, I just wanted to spotlight the difference there. Does that tend to resonate, or does that seem potentially possible?
So it's more about focusing on the somatics and less on the narratives.
Yep.
And the actual emotions.
Mm-hmm. So in any of the focuses, especially when if we're working with emotion, I try to pull out of the narrative. Pulling out of the narrative. Don't contribute to the story, because all we're doing is we're fueling the emotion and fueling intensity and fueling overwhelm. So if we're working with emotion in the context of meditation, be it insight or shamatha, then we're really focusing on just the momentary uprising of the sensations. And particularly, like if we're doing the noting feeling states exercise, we're just being in the body. We're not going into the story. If we're doing insight practice, then we might be able to tease apart what part is seeing, what part is hearing in the mind, but we're not going into the content at all. Does that clarify a little bit?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, yeah. So for today, definitely it's only body sensation. We're not going into the story at all. And sometimes that helps, because it's like, if we're continually dumping more fuel, it's hard to kind of be with a fire if the fuel keeps being poured on it. Okay, good. Anyone else before we get into it? All right, good. So allow yourself to come to a comfortable upright position then. Allow yourself to straighten up and settle in. We are going to be working with themes of expansion, contraction today. Well, we can start off with a little shamatha breath focus first. So part of the settling in is settling into the body. On the surface level of your posture, make any adjustments you need. And also part of the settling in is, can we settle into awareness itself? So whatever that brightness, that aliveness in the mind, in the body, however it is that you sense that, just settle into that. And allow awareness to then begin to sink into the experience of the breath. So going with the theme of today, we can sink into the themes of expansion and contraction automatically with breath. As you're with the inhale, there's the feelings of expansion that can take place as the body fills with air. On that exhale, there's a contractive feeling as the body empties out and somewhat collapses. And conversely, on the inhale, as we fill with air, there's that expansive quality, but there may also be contractive qualities, a tightening that occurs as we become full. Literally, the contracting of the diaphragm. Likewise, on the exhale, even though we're contracting because we're emptying out, there might be an expansiveness of more spaciousness, relief, as well, an expansiveness in the diaphragm. So you can focus, attune yourself to any of these qualities of expansion, contraction, or both, even as we're engaging in simple contact with breath. And if you want, as we're engaging in simple contact with breath, observing the expansive, contractive qualities. If you'd like to label, you can label expansion, contraction, both, depending upon what your primary noticing is. So whatever wants to expand, allow it. Whatever wants to contract, allow it. That continual allowing, permitting. That's a form, expression of the equanimity we are bringing into this focus. Okay, very good. So knowing that breath is always there, always available. You can either integrate breath into the next stage of focus or go back to it exclusively at any time. But for now, I invite you to open up the scope of the focus to include this full body, allowing your awareness to free float, noticing any sensation, whether it's gross or subtle, pressure on pressure, or emotional in nature, the feel out versus the feel in. Whatever you notice, just discern a facet of your experience at a time. But for now, let's play around with just working with the theme of expansion. Just primarily note expansion wherever you notice it. Contact it, label it, explore the boundaries, the contours, all the while accepting, allowing. So working with expansion, wherever you notice expansion, just allow, allow, allow. Okay, good. Now allowing expansion to be in the back seat, focus primarily on contraction. Wherever you notice contraction in the body, contacting, labeling, exploring its boundaries and contours, and bringing this accepting and allowing. Okay, good. So we're just working with exclusively the flavors of contraction. Now, let's just free float. Open form, open play. Moment by moment, just discern facet of your experience. Is it expansion, contraction, both? So again, it might sound like this: contraction, expansion, both, expansion, contraction, and so on like that. Whatever flavor, whatever force you contact, just permit, allow, accept equanimity. the more still we can keep our posture, the more readily the forces of expansion, contraction make themselves known. This is very, very subtle work. The more stillness we have, the more we can discern the subtlety of experience. The more that we can promote focusing on the subtlety of the experience, the more well-defined, tangible it becomes. If we get right down to it, any driver's sensation, ache, discomfort is a result of expansion, contraction, not being able to pass through each other. The more that we can discern the flavors of expansion, contraction, permit, allow them, we may get the experience here and there of discomforts breaking up, driver's sensations neutralizing. Conceivably, any impasse that arises within the meditative practice can be reduced down to expansion, contraction. The more that they can flow through each other, the more that we can just recycle that energy that becomes unbound. Whenever you contact the expansive qualities and it's pleasant, can you appreciate that? Allow yourself to ride off of that pleasant field tone. Whenever you come across contraction and it's unpleasant, can you lean into having equanimity, acceptance of it? Between the appreciation and the equanimity, it helps induce a stability of focus, a groundedness, amidst all the flux and flow of expansion and contraction. And if you want, you can take this theme of expansion, contraction outside of the body as well, as you're aware of spaciousness, aware of external sound. There can also be flavors of expansion and contraction out and about around you, as well as inside. Allow your focus to expand and contract as well. Expanding outward into space, noticing expansion and contraction. Or contract inwards into the body, noticing expansion, contraction. It's all flux and flow. Okay. At ease, everybody. Post-bell practice. Allow yourself to remain open to what you've generated thus far. What did you notice? What did you observe? What happened in your sit this morning?
In keeping with, I mean, it's shamatha practice, so it's concentration, and I'm very used to following the breath,
Mhm.
looking for the pleasant and looking for the pleasant in relinquishment or relaxation feeling in the downside or the exhale. So the easiest thing to get into switching to expansion contraction for me was the feeling in the lungs and belly as the chest expands and air comes in and goes out. And qualitatively, it's a very different feeling.
How so?
I found less less obvious pleasant to detect in either side, inhale or exhale.
Mm.
The inhale was expansion, sensations of expansion. Exhale was, sensations of at least settling back to normal as opposed to real contraction. I find contraction easier to see when it comes to states of mind. When, anger or aversion comes in, the contraction of consciousness is very common. I was trying to stay with the body. I couldn't help but notice, as in staying with the body, there was definitely a contracted consciousness just on those areas.
Mhm.
And there wasn't a lot of pleasant or unpleasant, it just felt very neutral. In fact, the times that I did catch the mind going into see active, hear active, was when the mind was getting bored and looking for something else.
Mhm.
And then just trying to bring it back to the limited gokara, you know. That's just basically what I noticed, really, for the most part.
Good one. Yeah. So right there, earlier, as I was saying, there tends to be kind of a neutralizing effect that the focus
Yeah,
brings. So
really
it's like
neutral.
that was very salient for you. So maybe that could be something put in the toolbox for if you're doing another focus and there's feeling of kind of overwhelm or getting
Mm.
stuck.
Hmm.
Maybe switch into expansion contraction. That might kind of bring the fire down, the intensity,
Hmm.
kind of bring this more pervasive neutrality, possibly.
It also makes me wonder that when I do the way I do shamatha practice regularly, if it isn't really a very mental thing,
Hmm.
in, out, that am I really, well, I am feeling the cooling that comes with the in-breath and relaxation. So no, maybe not. But it just in comparison, it just had a qualitatively different feel. Like it just did feel much more body centered.
Mhm.
Uh, but somehow the in and out with the breath is just inherently more interesting. It was easier to maintain alertness with that, following that, as opposed to with the body expansion contraction, where it was like sometimes it's like come back, come back, come back.
It'd be I think a worthwhile exploration to maybe just kind of go back and forth and just see how this might progress as well. Since it sounds like you've got a longer, deeper relationship with the other way of working with breath, just spend a little time going back and forth and see how they might begin to influence each other as well. That might be worthwhile. Good. All right. Thank you, Juan. Anybody else? What took place for you, especially with respect to the technique today? What happened for you? Let's see, Nicole in the chat, you're saying you definitely found it was an easier way to work with breath. Yeah, so that kind of resonated with you in terms of the breath focus part.
Yeah, very much. And it was so much easier to just maintain focus. That was kind of one of the big takeaways that I had. I was also like getting the neutralization of pretty much everything. I was getting that flavor as well. And I don't know, for whatever reason, I was just I had propensity to go into overwhelm mode today. And there was just a lot going on, and it was this congealed mass. Um, and so I found myself, labeling both, both contraction, expansion throughout most of the practice. Because it was primarily contraction at first, but then the expansive qualities would come in there. And I just realized as well, like the more metta and equanimity I brought to it, the more, of course it opened up. So I was trying to really kind of feed it there. But yeah, I was hoping that the grip of contraction would release there completely in the end. No dice, unfortunately, but there was still definitely, you know, that subtle sort of like layers kind of going on, just of contraction, expansion, and yeah, that was interesting.
So you were finding expansion more pleasant, contraction more unpleasant.
Definitely.
As
Yep.
as I was saying earlier, you found that to be true. That's good. And then you were saying that the more that you brought the metta or the equanimity to the contraction, it began to show signs of kind of lightening or opening a bit.
Yeah, it was breaking up, and I did find also it was really interesting because, you know, my focus just hones in. It's hard to have an expansive focus of just the entire body when, you know, the primary sort of sensation you're working with is, I don't know, contraction based. And so I just kind of found myself honing in on that and not being able really to get away. So I stayed with that, and it started breaking up, you know, just by virtue of like the inward smile. It was very poignant.
Inward smile. Good.
So yeah, that was nice. I just kind of like definitely a flow there for sure.
Good. So I definitely encourage you, you know, the more that you're able to hone into the contractive aspect of that and bring that equanimity and the internally directed smile towards it, begins to break up, or at least the sense of it being a problem tends to diminish. Yeah. Okay, good. Good. Thank you for that, Nicole. Okay, probably time for a quick last one if anybody feels they would like to share. Okay, good. So for many people, first time doing it, it's kind of subtle, abstract, but I found personally that, you know, the expansive contractive focus is exceptionally helpful for breaking up blockages, fixations, compulsions, driver sensations, just the general unpleasantness of the body when sitting. One of the things I was saying later on in the instruction is anytime we can tap into any of these unpleasant sensations and notice, discern, stay with the expansive contractive qualities, they tend to turn into flow states or become a little bit less of exerting an unpleasant influence on our experience. And when there's that breakup, it's like there's this some kind of energy that was just kind of being held bound. And when it turns into flow state, it's like that energy becomes available to become recycled into wakefulness, into energy, into equanimity. So this kind of gets into the deeper internal alchemy within the practice, so to speak. So the more that we can tap into the expansion contraction, then it's like things begin to flow and break up, and it's like it constantly recharges our battery to continue on. So I feel that it's a highly valuable focus to explore and continue to develop. If it doesn't resonate today, then you know, it'll begin to at some point. And I think that will become very handy.
And hey, just really quick, for what it's worth, guys, Shinzen Young has this home practice thing that he does every month, if anybody's not aware, and it's coming up this weekend. And he's got a specific class in there working with expansion, contraction. You know, if anybody's interested. I don't have the link.
Maybe I could put that on the Facebook page, or if you find that, you could put that on the Facebook page. Or wait, you don't do Facebook. Okay.
Hey, I want to do. It's not.
Me too.
Working
If you go to shinzen.org and look under retreats, it would be there.
Shinzen.org, it would be there. United.
And the sign-up deadline, the sign-up deadline is usually midnight the Wednesday before, so that would be tomorrow.
Okay, good. So there's a little bit of time. Okay, thank you for that, Nicole. Okay, let us do a dedication of merit. By the merits of these acts and other such virtues, may we attain the liberation for the benefit of all beings. We bow before those who come before us on the path, and before those who come after us on the path. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Have yourselves a wonderful day. Hope to see you all tomorrow.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Thanks, bye.